Alrighty. Well, I actually got a suggestion from a friend on Discord about this one, so I figured why not. On Majority Report, there was a segment that I admittedly didn't watch because I kind of skipped the interview portion because I like getting the news and then going to the fun half. Whatever, sue me. Um, I do tune in to, guess that kind of like today where somebody's just like, oh, this was very interesting, or like I could see that there was like a lot of engagement with it, or the topic in general is something that I want to see or listen to. But in this case, there was a an author who he kind of crosses into political stuff and nerdum, which are you know uh, cultural nerdum. He did a like pick your own adventure where it's like, what if Trump wins? Here actually, boom, on the side here. That's pretty cool. But yeah, here it is. So you have an idea of what the book is, because yeah, tried to do that earlier. So I'm actually like a big like choose your own adventure nerd. I've always like I grew up loving those stories and those books, and of course like I love D&D. So it's one of those things where yeah, I do like the role playing aspects of those types of things. So uh when I heard that that was the title of his book, I was definitely very interested. But I was more interested to see Sam's interview with him because yeah, it's Sam Cedar. We love Sam Cedar here. So let's take a look at the interview.
We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. Emma is off today. I want to welcome to the program Daniel Hunter. He is an organizer and a movement coach and trainer, founder of Choose Democracy, author of What If Trump Wins, an interactive pick your path adventure, and also
That's so cool.
the piece 10 Ways to Be Prepared and Grounded Now That Trump Has Won. That was an update from What If He Wins. Daniel, I am happy to have you here, but wish we were not having this conversation.
I feel like that's the way I've been having lots of conversations with friends and gatherings and so forth these days, which is it's good to be with other people. And I wish the circumstances of which we were gathering were different.
Yep. All right, let's go through these 10 steps. Really, I mean, very helpful. And, I've been sort of winging it over the past couple of days, just largely from like, my experience the first time around. But this is really, really helpful. And I also found it interesting. And, for someone who is not necessarily immediately inclined to think this way, where in preparing yourself to help others, really, in this, you have to start with sort of like making sure, like it's psychological, what you need to do first before you start to actually get into any type of sort of like broader activism.
I just thought of something. If it's not a pick your own adventure, then I'm gonna be very disappointed.
And so for number one, it's you write, trust yourself. Tell us about that.
So I'm a strategist. My interest is how do we win? How do we actually beat back, the policies that Trump wants to put in place? So I surprised myself because I thought, well, I wanted to write an article about how we organize that. And for a while I thought we'll start with strategic principles, but actually we have to back up a little bit, which is what is Trump? Trump is part of a global phenomenon.
It's a haiku. What is Trump? Who? Or wait, that's not a haiku.
Of right-wing populists. And they're not emerging from nowhere. They're emerging from a condition in which people are feeling greater and greater distrust of social institutions, greater and greater distrust from each other. There's greater distrust. If you remember what COVID did to a lot of us, distrust with our families and our friends. And as a person who works on climate, that's my heart. Even greater distrust in the weather. There's just, it's in the atmosphere. And so one of the things that authoritarians
It's the one thing we still control, guys.
do so strongly is they add to that feeling of distrust, including just by our own selves. And I'm remembering the quote from 1984, that great book where what they say, the party told you to reject the evidence of your own eyes and ears. It was its final and most essential command. And so we have to just ground ourselves back in, you've got to trust yourself. The things you're seeing are there. You can't internalize the crazy making, or at least, you can't do as much as you can to create boundaries around the crazy making that's out there. And so that became the starting point.
I had been reading, come across some reading in terms of like just abusive personal relationships, and this is also like sort of one of the sort of like core principles within the context of that is like, how do you get past the gaslighting? Before you can do anything, you need to be confident that your assessment of what's going on is in fact what's going on.
Yeah,
that's right. And so I think there's two steps, which is one step is building.
We all felt that collectively, right? Like this kind of makes me feel better that I wasn't just like sitting here thinking that I was being gaslit by everybody in the media.
Some trust in ourselves. And the second is testing it out with people that we trust, extending that trust outwards into our community, which people have been doing naturally. I mean, reaching out to friends, texting. I've noticed I'm making like a own mental list of who are the people who check in with me during this particular time, and noting that as that's a trust building measure. And so we've been gathering, and sometimes that's gathering around a fire pit. Sometimes that's just hanging out. But it's also a chance to share assessments, not just about what happened, but about where do I want to be in these times? What are the pieces that I have to offer in what look like an uncertain environment? And so to use each other to help find grounding. So trust with ourselves, and then second, trust with each other, finding spaces to be together with other folks.
Pretty sure I'm trying to kick a sinus infection. I've had it for like 2 days now.
And this goes sort of dovetails into the third step, which you say is grieve. And before we get into that too, I want to say, like, based upon the first two, like how do we assess whether we're overreacting? Right? Like, I mean, there is a tendency, I think, for some people to be like, I've got to get out of the country, et cetera. And frankly, for some people, I don't think that's, I think that's within the realm of, that's not unreasonable. I mean, if I was involved in, like, let's say, if I was on the prosecution team on the Manhattan DA's office, I might be concerned that they're coming for retribution. And I mean, I might, like the idea of leaving the country might not necessarily be, extreme. How do we get a sense of calibrating what the threat is to us as individuals and what the threat is to different constituencies? I mean, we just spoke to an immigration lawyer, and there's like the idea of, deportation for a couple of million people is
on the table,
not in any way a overreaction to anything. And there are other cohorts of people out there. Well, how do you and tie this into the grieving too? Because that's also like a full assessment of like what the implications of this are.
Yeah. So, I mean, overreaction means that you're in reaction. You're in reaction to something else. And in this case, we're in reaction to a future that's uncertain.
Sorry.
And so when you're in reaction to a future that's uncertain, you can't know.
I always, this is why I couldn't take school seriously. Like people that do that, they're so serious about it, but it's like
if you're fully one way or another, right?
Pointed.
There's no way to tell exactly what will Trump do, how extreme will it be. There's different scenarios about how that could go.
Duh.
So we have to check in, I think, a little bit with ourselves. And I think that's part of the community grounding, that's part of the grieving, which is to make our best assessment. And I work on climate change. And so one of the psychological dynamics that I'm familiar with is extreme thinking. So in climate change, we talk about denialism, which is the idea that in the face of uncertainty, it just isn't real. And so there's a set of people who just can't imagine climate change is real and they deny it. There's another version of inability to handle uncertainty, which is doomism.
How much is it that they're not necessarily like not seeing it, or it's just that they don't care because they really think it's not going to affect us in the way that everybody's been saying, but they will. Yes, we know it'll affect the next generation, but that's the thing. They don't give a shit.
It's just over and there's nothing we can do about it. Both of those are, the therapists tell me that both of those are psychologically the same position, which is attempting to handle uncertainty by creating an absolutely certain worldview.
Right.
And so neither of those are necessarily accurate. Neither of those are backed up by sort of a scientific perspective, certainly not denialism and not doomism either. And so what that means is there's a window of uncertainty that we have to be able to tolerate. Grieving is the process of assisting us to acknowledge the things we know to be true, grieve the things we think to be true, and allow some amount of uncertainty in terms of what might happen. And that may be very uncomfortable. Humans do not like living in uncertainty, especially when it can be things as deeply personal, as passionate as, what happens to my family, what happens to my own personal safety, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the human condition, and that's the condition we're in right now under a President Trump. That's not to say that we can't find some pieces. And I think that the grieving process is about starting to name out Yes, he will attempt to do a mass deportation program of some sort. Yes, he will absolutely roll back climate policies at the federal level. Yes, and on like that, beginning to name, acknowledge, and let go of. And whatever feelings arise around that, anger, frustration, sadness that we're in those conditions. But that grieving process is so...
Yeah, but I feel like we're pre-grieving because it hasn't happened yet, and it's like not necessarily happening. Like I don't know how much of it is he's actually going to do, but yes, the proposed tariffs thing and people already firing based on that, I can kind of see that. Yeah, maybe they are they're dead set on it, which I hope not. This is me doing the hopium thing where I'm just like, please don't. But man, you're probably gonna do the thing.
So important, because even if you're not necessarily a feelings person, we all remember the number of people who ran around in 2016 in this daze saying, I can't believe he's doing this. I just can't believe it. And that's a signal that people didn't do grieving, that they didn't accept the reality that's coming towards them. Because Trump told us his plan, just like again, he told us his plan, and he intends to implement it. And it will be a more extreme version of, it's not the last 2016 experience, it's a more extreme version of that he's planning to do. So we have to accept it, believe it. Let's deal with the reality.
Yeah.
And so it's a two.
I guess my way of thinking isn't exactly the most productive.
Well, I guess the next part of the process
worst.
is release that which you cannot change. So it's an acceptance of like, this is all real and this is going to suck. And we just don't know exactly how it's going to suck. And it's going to be dangerous for people. And we don't know exactly how it's going to be dangerous for people and for whom.
Did I mention that I laugh when I'm nervous?
And then the next part of that is saying, okay, starting to assess. And I am the type of person where it's like, I will prepare for the worst case scenario and I'll try and get that done first so that like I can relieve myself of some of that anxiety. Like I've done everything I can do. I may be overreacting, but it's easier to course correct if I'm overreacting than it is to course correct if I'm underreacting.
Actually, that's a great point.
I feel like my pessimist friends have been in better psychological shape at this moment than folks who are holding on to greater amounts of optimism. I do want to just caution, though. I think one thing I just want to remind people about.
See, and here I am trying to be more optimistic because I'm just like, I wasn't as optimistic during the election. I'll be honest.
Because you said it's going to suck, and that's absolutely true. It's also the case that it won't only suck. And so just for folks who are in the position of sort of heading into a dreary landscape of it's just going to be, it will be chaotic, it will be rough, there will be bad policies after bad policies, 3 a.m. tweets that Trump comes up with a national policy that will twist the federal.
I don't know. I hope it's as quiet as it is now. Like it's been really quiet. Even the White House meetup with Joe Biden, which was, that was a weird, whoa.
Instruments into it.
They're sitting there smiling together,
new thing. All those things are true.
I don't know, guys. I think that just proves our point that we all know, where it's like they're all in it together.
There will also be many beautiful days that we will experience, and
sorry, guys, I'm about to go into full Alex Jones mode. I forgot that this is my content swing. I'm going to do it in the middle of the video.
Part of the protection psychologically for us is to remind ourselves to be rooted
gay frogs,
not only in what Trump is up to and tracking that, but also in the beautiful lives that we have in the family and folks around us. So just to affirm, yes, it will suck. It won't only suck. And that's a reminder that I keep getting reminded to by colleagues of
we should put that on a shirt.
Mine who are living under authoritarian regimes, who keep pointing out, yes, it's bad. Some parts of it are bad, but also there's a lot of beauty. And that's a little bit of the part of releasing out. We're not trying to control everything. We don't have to get involved in every fight. We don't have to respond to every tweet. We don't have to track every wild conspiracy theory that Trump's...
No, actually, that's the thing. The more we engage with it, the more power we're giving him. So I think that's kind of part of it. Why, you got so many people that are just disengaged right now. That's why he's not doing anything, because he's just like, well, I won. Now what?
Going to put out there.
That
may be important for certain people. I mean, I think, Sam, you're phenomenally good at tracking all of these things and being, educating the rest of us about what's going on.
But at this point, I am coping.
For all this, we don't necessarily have to invest ourselves in all of those.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's going to be important because we just can't psychologically, I think most of us hang on to all of those things. And so therefore we have to let go. And so I use the Serenity Prayer coming from Randall Niebuhr as the example of that, because he wrote it while he was watching the rise of Nazism.
I did not realize that. I didn't know where that came from. My perspective on it has changed insofar as I've seen it on doilies and in knittings, and I'm like, oh boy. But
I'm pretty sure that didn't that start in AA? I'm 99% sure about that. Like,
But it really, when you take that, grant me,
because that was not part of our like schooling or anything. Like, and a lot of people always like they conflate that. They're like, "Don't you do that like God grant me serenity thing?" It's like, no,
the God,
no,
I
we
guess.
don't. My dad
But
does.
really, you can grant yourself the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When
By the way, he's I think like over 40 years sober. So go down.
that is developed in the process of watching a fascist regime come to power as a result of that. It's really basically, in many respects, saying like, take stock, deploy your resources in such a way that you don't deplete yourself, and don't, and make a wise assessment as to what the landscape is and where you are best suited to, I guess, to deploy those resources, which is number 5, find your path.
Yeah. So then we're drifting into more strategy piece where I thought, oh, we'll get right into it, but actually, it takes some time to get to that point.
Ow.
Taking our path is starting to identify what are the different pathways of resistance. So 8 months ago, we began doing scenario planning with different activists. I brought them in and we did a kind of role-based, turn-based option. So Trump would do a move and then people would do a counter move as unions and activists and so forth. And initially when we began doing it, activists picked essentially 2 big strategies, which was let's keep doing petitions. Let's get a lot of people to say this is outrageous in some way. And the second was let's get a lot of people to show up at marches, rallies, protests, etc. And Trump didn't care about either of them. He just kept implementing policy. Trump would do this, we'd do a march, and he'd say, okay, and then he'd keep going. And so we started to get more clear about we need to help people understand certain roles will be more important. It's not to say there's not a role for marches, not to say it's not a role for outrage, but it's a different ballgame. We're not dealing with a man who values democratic spirit. We're dealing with someone who is a bully and authoritarian.
They're literally trying to change people's opinions on democracy, where they're just like, yeah, democracy's not that good, is it? Like, come on, guys, right? We got to try something new.
And so a bully doesn't care about your feelings. A bully wants you to be in pain. So expressions of pain isn't the thing that's moving him. So that means,
that actually kind of explains why I just hate the guy. He's just a bully. I mean, breaking news.
We have to find out different roles. So I just sort of identified 4 that we started to see over and over again that were strategies for combating. So one of them is just protecting people. Huge amount of people are going to be lives disrupted, trans folks, immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. So the role of developing mutual aid conditions, developing
you know what? Let's also say that it's probably going to upend a lot of Trump supporters' lives just because of the economic conditions. If he actually does this tariff bullshit, I'm telling you right now, they are going to feel like just constant egg on their face every time they're in the store. But the egg will be too expensive.
Mechanisms for us to protect people who are politically targeted. I hope some of these people who are targeted don't flee overseas, that they don't go overseas, and that we can, in fact, give them a lot of security support in our own community.
A trans friend that was just talking about this.
Second one is disrupting and disobeying. That's the one that
It's just weird because it's like, are you already going through the immigration program? Because that would, because they're talking about like Japan, and I'm like, that's not gonna happen. But okay, I'm sorry, but unless you get the legal status, which is very hard to get.
Come from. That's the place that I have the most experience. And that's strategizing acts of non-cooperation. So in fact, the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, is now in that category, as he just announced, will you resign if Trump asks you to resign? He said, no, I will disobey what I believe is a wrong order. And that's the behavior, actually, that will be very helpful for stopping an authoritarian.
Yeah, but that's why they're trying to get rid of anybody that would do that.
We should also say that announcing that is also very important, right? Because it's the flip side of what we saw with Bezos and the endorsement for Kamala Harris.
That's right.
I don't think that endorsement would have meant anything. What it really signaled to me was like, oh, this, at the very least, this billionaire, I mean, this is the model, right, for how the fascism grows, where the billionaire goes, I can do what I've been doing, but I'm going to go with the path of least resistance. And I'm going to take that path before I even get to the turn in the road. Like, he doesn't even have to threaten me. I'm going to do it in advance. And Powell sort of like, he could say, well, I'm not going to address this now. And then have done, but by saying it out front, he's emboldening other people to take a similar position without it having to happen to him.
That's right. And that's a signal for the rest of us. So for those of us who are in government jobs, for example, to not resign, not make this easy for them to have a power vacuum, but to hold on and to use our professional ethics, remind ourselves, remind people of, we have codes of conduct, we have internal ethics processes that we want to uphold and stay despite the Trump administration's attempt. Okay, so we've got protecting people. I'm just going to name the 4 here. So protect.
Could you imagine if like he does it with the FAA, the aviation? It's just like, you know what? We don't need the towers anymore. Sky chaos.
People disrupting and disobeying, and then defending civic institutions. And so all the folks who are both bureaucrats who are inside will be involved in, hopefully, a defense for that institution, for the EPA to continue to do the thing that it does. And
is he going to bolster Space Force? I just thought about that.
For the U.S. military, for example, we've been forewarned, Trump has intentions of using the Insurrection Act to deploy military against protesters in the streets.
That's insane.
And
yeah, that, I'll be honest, this is the stuff that scares the crap out of me. And I know that I'm putting on a face, but you know what? If he starts cracking down on dissension,
the military knows that will forever politicize them if they were to be using live bullets against protesters and doing lethal damage. And so that they understand Trump's putting them between a rock and a hard place, either disobeying orders or outright, or engaging in what will be the end of the military.
Come on, guys. We all saw the Pepsi commercial with Kylie Jenner. Like, don't you know? Just give him a Pepsi and everything will be fine.
As we know it in this country. So defense. So every one of those civic institutions has its own strategy. And those of us on the outside also get to support them, partially by holding up a mirror to how resistance can look and encouraging them. Celebrating the people like Jerome when he does that thing. Yay, Jerome. And celebrating people who get fired when they get fired for the right
Yay, Jerome.
things. And so on. And so we have a role and responsibility in playing that.
You talk about this later in the piece, the idea of you sitting down, like I know you've done some like other sort of like, game theory sort of conferences with, military or ex-military people. And, you saying like it was weird for you to be sitting there because those aren't the type of people you tend to strategize with. And, I'm sitting here like the Hegseth is going in to clearly be part of a process of purging the military of people who they think is not going to be loyal to Donald Trump, as opposed to the institution or the Constitution, which, supposedly are aligned. And, me having to get over my sort of like, I don't know if I would call it prejudice because my disposition towards the military, I don't think it's unfair prejudice, but like I
have a feeling that we're quite the same on this one.
A healthy skepticism about the military.
I'm gonna go into it in depth, but the way that they literally use cult tactics to break you down and just, oh man, that was kind of where I was like, the psychology of the military needs to be exposed. This is insane.
But in this moment, like we're in like popular front mode for these type of things because it could be that serious. I mean, that's the tricky part is that there are going to be voices out there. And I obviously I conceive of this in my world, but there are going to be voices in my world, in my universe of like, of YouTube and Twitter and whatnot, who are going to be like, oh, you're making common cause with the generals or something like that.
Oh,
and it's going to trigger my like, I don't want to make common cause with the generals. No. I don't like the generals. I don't like the military.
No, I understand.
But in this instance, like maintaining a focus on where the threat lies in this moment. Like, how do you do that? I mean, on some level, we saw it with like Harris getting together with Lynn Cheney or Liz Cheney. The problem
why is that so hard for him?
And with that is, I just think it was going to be effective. I was like, if they're going to do that and it works, okay, for the time being, I can fight this other fight later. And I mean, I even remember a story, like an Israeli general was like told at one point, like, you realize your supposed allies in the United States, these Christian Zionists, they want you to burn in hellfire when the second coming goes. And he goes, I'll deal with that bridge when I get to it. And they have made that, alliance. I mean, that adopting that mindset seems to me to be a big, it's much easier for me to do it with EPA scientists, and it's much easier for me to do it with like some people in the DOJ, maybe depending on where they are, and in the National Labor Relations Board or et cetera, et cetera. but there are certain areas where I have a reflexive like, ooh, but you can't have that because it's about the civic institution and not almost like what fills it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two aspects of it. I mean, one, we don't have to play all roles. So I'm not a defend civic institution person by my nature. I have a different belief system, and it's not in defending the current version of democracy that the U.S. has. But I am aware.
I like to build upon it and then like do this like, I mean, my version of this is like do a little pick and choose where it's like we got some really good parts of it and we can build on it and make it way better, but then we can also take some parts out and also institute some more. But I don't know.
Aware how destructive it will be if some of these institutions are fully taken out. In the case of the military, it's very practical. Apparently, the second one for me, which is I don't want to get shot in the streets, and there are folks inside who also don't want to shoot me.
Right.
And so those are aligned in that aspect of it. And I think what that means is that what we're doing here is we're not.
Yeah, the scary part is once they start convincing like our family members to be okay with like rounding us up and putting us in camps, and like just the idea of like, oh, well, they were in the middle of political dissent. Are you okay with that? And you know, there's a lot of people that are just convinced that they are like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, he was on the wrong side. I love my kid, but
building a sort of framework of common cause of
that's scary.
We're all aligned in the movement together.
Terrifying.
But instead, it's more understanding we have overlapping interests here about not getting the military to be involved in this particular set of behaviors. So I think both of those, can go hand in hand. And you're mentioning this is so important because it brings up the fourth category, which is alternative institution building, which is it's not enough. I mean, for those of us who are deeply unhappy with the current system as it exists, we're not interested in just defending the previous version of democracy that the U.S. has had.
I mean, I get that.
Instead, we're interested in new. Can we get rid of the Electoral College? Can we talk about developing participatory democracy mechanisms?
Great.
Can we talk about strengthening education? Because you cannot.
Okay, so this kind of plays into like the defund the police thing. It's the messaging, great. The marketing, awful.
Have a meaningful democracy without education.
Because you can't sell that on normies. I'm sorry.
Participation, and we barely have representation. So,
like everything he's saying is right, and like you would want people that would want to like start looking at democracy a little bit differently. But the way that he framed that, where he kind of made it sound like, yeah, we're deeply unhappy with the way things are now, and we want to change it completely. It's like, yeah, you don't have a lot of people are going to push back against that.
So I think, the alternative institution building is a place for those of us who want to pour our energy into tracking all the many things that need to be changed and creating those institutions to do that. And so the reason I find those four roles so helpful is because we're not going to be attracted to all of them.
Right.
But it will be helpful for us to observe other people doing some of those roles that will be useful for us at some other moment. And I want to flag it.
And having some respect that they're doing it, like being able to say, like, this is not what I want to do. I don't like it. I'm allergic to this. But being able to accept, like, it needs to be done. And I'm glad that somebody's doing it.
Yeah, I toy with that idea with running for like local office. I mean, I really don't want to. I don't have the drive to do this, but at some point somebody has to do this. And this last election, I saw way too many local positions just without a Democrat even running. So it was like, what are we doing, guys? Especially for like county boards and shit like that.
It's all going to be hard work. Protecting the EPA is going to be hard work. Supporting people who are undocumented to find safe places, it's going to be hard work. It's going to be hard work all around. And so if we're not in appreciation mode, if we're just in criticism mode of that strategy isn't the way I think that everyone else should go, then we're going to spend a lot of energy attacking each other rather than appreciating the
That's what the left is the best at. Come on, man.
Movement ecosystem and appreciating the different roles, including what I'm finding with some of my own friends is that roles that I used to play last, 4 years ago or 8 years ago, I'm feeling called to something new and appreciating that within their own selves, that maybe I didn't want to be a disrupt person, but actually this is now too extreme.
Number 6, you have do not obey.
I mean, it is, I hate to say it, it's a healthy strategy to kind of meet people in the middle, especially the people who are, the largest voter bloc in this country, non-voters.
Advance, do not self-censor. I mean, we sort of touched on that in terms of like, Jerome Powell in the Fed. I mean, he is announcing beforehand that like, if you do this thing, I'm not going to do it. And, I in the context of this job, when I was doing Air America, we were all like, we're going to get audited. Probably. I mean, we did.
Oh, shit. I didn't think about that.
Which I frankly was surprised about. And I wouldn't be surprised if I get audited in this situation. Just because.
I got a wife that has a A mind like an accountant.
of the nature, one of the reasons why I got fired from MSNBC was because we went after Mike Cernovich, and he got Jack Posobiec to dig up an old tweet. They got Don Jr. to retweet it, and then it was off to the races.
I remember that.
And
wow, they talked about that on a radio show, Opie and Anthony, I used to listen to.
That specter of like, do we keep our head down or something like that? In the meantime, I mean,
would you do it again, Sam?
Would I do that tweet? Oh, that tweet, yeah, it was a funny tweet. I mean, that experience worked out quite well for me. I mean, at the end of the day, but
that's the story to tell, Sam. That's exactly it. That's exactly the point, which is, it may be the case that you might lose your job at the EPA by doing a resistance something, and it may be the case that you will be so proud to tell your kids and grandkids that you were part.
EPA is a little different than working for MSNBC
of a very important resistance campaign. And so that's the historical moment we're in, it's a great moment to take great pride in acts of resistance, tweaking,
the resistance is going to court and being like, you cannot fire me.
Of the elites, whatever it is.
Although they control the judiciary. I already pre-fucked up before I said it.
And so in that way, it's almost a different relationship to repression than the relationship of I'm so worried about getting repressed. And absolutely, I believe people should make good calls. I think I have no judgment of anyone's individual circumstances. But
I was thinking Mighty Python every time I hear that word. Help, I'm being repressed.
What we're aware of is the primary way that authoritarians, we see this across the globe in Hungary and Brazil and Turkey, the primary way that authoritarians are able to claim control isn't through a lot of repression. It's through occasional repression that scares people so they know what to do in this administration.
Yeah.
And therefore, they cede power right away. Power you don't use, you lose.
It's sort of the fun.
Well, honestly, that's what my argument with the whole Biden not doing any executive actions, any at all. Like, he should be just doing even the smallest ones. Just get them done. What are you guys doing?
Theory where he told Richie, I'm talking about Happy Days. Nobody knows what I'm talking about because I'm so old. But
sorry, Sam. You gotta have to bring me in.
It's almost not worth it. I don't think there's anybody alive who knows what I'm talking about. But there was.
Did nobody watch reruns? Like, I used to watch Happy Days all the time with my grandma.
A show called Happy Days. It was very popular. Fonzie was the tough kid, and Richie wanted to know
Cunningham.
why it was that everybody listened to Fonzie. He's like, I hit somebody once. That's all I had to do. Yeah. And then everybody else knew not to mess with me at that
it was the jukebox
point. But this is also a little bit more getting people to self-censor. And, that doesn't mean necessarily you're for the EPA, you quit. It could mean you stay in there and you fight. And, people have got to make that decision. Reorient your political map was what we were talking about earlier in terms of you were doing some game theory essentially with people that you otherwise, could just have easily been protesting in another circumstance. But it's about assessing the moment and understanding and prioritizing sort of like what's going to keep you from getting shot at, I guess, out on the streets.
Yeah, I mean, just to affirm my credentials here, my first arrest was against Fort Benning, Georgia, for its support for training people to assassinate human rights workers overseas. And so, yes, so that the comment, and I told the generals that I told these ex-generals my story, and they shared their story, and here we are.
That wasn't the School of the Americas, was it? Or
it was the School of the Americas.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So the reorientation of the political map, I think, has to do with when you have an authoritarian, it takes a while for people to catch several nodes. I think one of them is, right now, a lot of us are really oriented around who voted for Trump and who didn't. And that's one way to analyze. It's not a very great way to analyze because, in fact, on lots of policies, on lots of issues, the way these things split is very different. And progressive policies are very popular.
Yeah, I hate to keep bringing this up, but it's like the AOC split where in New York where they voted for both. So there is obviously a dissension there where it has nothing to do with the parties. It really is the fact that they just don't trust these people anymore. The trust with politicians is gone. That's why they even look at Trump still and they're just like, yeah, you know what? He upsets a lot. He upsets both parties. They both hate this guy.
I mean, very popular.
When they see a guy like Mitch McConnell doing the dissension, that's where they're just like, yeah, you know what? See?
When you ask people, do you want clean water, clean air? Do you want to deal with climate change with renewable energy? Do you
It should be
want
the biggest does ever.
to keep people
Like,
who are
come on.
here
Expanded
for
Social Security. I mean,
exactly, right.
healthcare, whatever. Yeah.
name
Yeah.
it. So
Lead pipes, why did get rid of the lead in the pipes?
they continue to be very
They say clean water, but
positive.
sorry, that one actually affects me. Like, my area has very old pipes, and they have been working to do that, but yeah, I haven't trusted the water since.
And so sticking to the framing around Trump, not Trump, won't necessarily be helpful in the long term. So at some point, we're going to have to break apart our political map a little bit. And it's not about did you vote for this man or not. It's more about, and therefore sort of the party element of it. And it's more about going back to the policies, going back to the ways these policies harm or don't harm real people. And so that's one aspect of it. And I think another aspect of it is under an authoritarian regime, there will be new, I mean, we use the word common cause and then said don't use it, but some version of common cause with people who we do find abhorrent. What do we do when Liz Cheney gets arrested? What's our relationship to showing up for her in this particular moment of watching him attempt to scare other people? And
man, this is a very worst case scenario, at least you hope.
And I think that's part of it is then dealing with the political repression.
That's honestly the perfect example to like really freeze me in my tracks, because just even at the words Liz Cheney gets arrested, I'm like, I felt like
you're like,
I
yes,
felt a smile brewing inside me, but that's
I hear
exactly what I have to fight against.
I hear you. Well, no, you can still. No, I think we should figure out how way to be both.
Now, if it's Dick Cheney, I'm sorry, I ain't fighting for that mother.
We should be able to say, yeah, it's a shame she's getting arrested for the wrong reasons, or whatever it is for us. But but honestly, I think the truth is that we do have to do a kind of reorientation around
Dick.
People who are, particularly when we're seeing visibilized repression, even if those people aren't necessarily in our milieu, the political repression is not attempting to just freeze us; it's trying to freeze a population.
Right.
And so I'm jumping ahead here to number 9, but I'll walk into.
It's like focusing on the act that is taking place rather than who is it's subject to.
That's right. And so the attitude we have in terms of when that happens. So one aspect of when political repression happens is we can share the story. That's horrible. Can you believe that they arrested Liz Cheney or Daniel Hunter or Sam or whoever? That's one way of telling that story. Another way of telling that story.
Guys, hear what happened to that YouTuber with under 1,000 subs. PepTalks, he just, yeah, man.
I think I'm inspired by a group named Otpor in Serbia. So they were dealing with a dictatorship who was very repressive. They regularly beat up Otpor folks. And they used to have a saying that they would say, it only hurts when you're scared. And what they meant by that was they were attempting to create a story that says, we're not going to engage in fear. The major tool of an authoritarian is fear. And we're not going to feed that fear. In fact, quite the opposite. We're going to express and show bravery in the face of it. I did ask one of them, does it hurt less if you're scared? He said, no, it hurts the same amount no matter what. But the point here is attitude. That we're going to take a different attitude than being nervous, scared, joke about,
It's funny. My own family has made comments about how they're surprised how I'm not in bed crying over the election. That made me think what the hell? You guys, what do you think of me? What?
I don't want to get on a list. I want to get on a list.
Wow.
So one response politically, for example, I think I tell this, the article is a story from someone I've learned a lot from, Bayard Rustin. He was dealing with Martin Luther King at a period of time when Martin Luther King was very young and new to nonviolence theory. He and a bunch of other folks in Montgomery were being threatened with arrest. So they went underground. A lot of the preachers were hiding out in other people's houses. King himself had left the city for a while. And Bayard Rustin,
they actually did a book about this where it was kind of fiction, nonfiction. It was a mixture of both.
Then walked around and said, this is not how we should be. He was trained by Gandhi and had a Gandhi philosophy. And he said, you shouldn't be hiding, worried about what's going to happen to you. Go the opposite direction, go towards it. And so he convinced a couple of people, pastors who were likely on this list of arrests, to go down to the police station with their congregation and to demand that they get arrested there and then. And so they went in, several of them got booked, and more people began to show up as the crowd swelled, as people came out holding their citations proudly. And in fact, some leaders went into the room demanding that they get arrested, were turned away because they were told they weren't on the list. And they said, I'm a leader. What are you talking about? I should absolutely be arrested as well. And so they began arguing that they should get arrested because
your small potatoes, kid.
What would their people think if they didn't get arrested? They weren't really a leader. So it became, instead of being a fear-inducing tactic.
That'd be kind of funny. Just oh, Not even important enough to get arrested. It's like the old Western movies where it's just like, how much was my bounty?
The
$10.
the arrests themselves became part of a signal of strength.
Well,
And that's what I'm talking about.
you're also in that moment taking power because you get to dictate.
Absolutely.
You get to
Exactly.
dictate at least one element of this. If you're going to arrest me, you're going to do it on my terms, and that's going to be right now,
That's
right
true.
here, that type of thing.
That's right.
Or
And you're doing it
wherever
with you're doing it with your people. You're getting to say, signal. Again, this is attitude. This is about expressing an attitude towards repression, which is rather than grinning, bearing, and being scared of it. That we, it's not always
Sucks. The medicine's not doing its job.
that we invite it. That's not at all what I'm suggesting here. But it's about the attitude that we take when it comes our way. And so I think we have a lot of control. In fact, everybody has a lot of influence about what kinds of stories do we tell when so-and-so gets arrested out of the government or fired or whatnot. We should cheer. Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Let's talk about the get real
Okay,
about power.
I mean-
This is really interesting. The upside down.
I'm not sure if I want to cheer something that if it's going to have like, actual harm because of it, like if the person's in the position and they're like in a position to help, then I don't want to even think about, well,
Round triangle. What does
pat them
that
on the
tell us
back and
about
get them excited.
power?
So the upside down triangle comes from folks in Thailand, were some of the first originators of it. And what they did was it's a theory of power. So you imagine an upside down triangle, and it's not stable. An unjust power is not actually a stable power.
Sorry.
It needs pillars of
I'm such a kid.
support to keep it up. And those pillars may include a mainstream media that tells a positive story about them, or most recently from the last election, that treats them like equivalents. There's this and that, and Trump said this and Harris said that, as if they're in equivalent worlds. There's military, there's any number of different institutions. But also that those things, all of those aren't done, they aren't implemented by the elites. People in power that we think of traditionally in power, they don't do anything. They tell other people to do things, and other people obey. When people don't obey, these systems start to fall apart very quickly. And that is the long arc around dealing with authoritarianism. So in other regimes, like when we're dealing with regime change in other parts of the globe, the pathway to resistance is developing a long story about why people should stop obeying an unjust authority. And if Trump turns out to be the person that many of us believe him to be, he is and will be an unjust authority in an authoritarian style. That kind of style doesn't respond to democratic norms. That style may or may not.
Yeah, but I think that's where we kind of may have like messed up a little bit with the January 6th thing, because now we've made it a little bit harder for us to do like that kind of dissension without them just pointing it right back at us and them going, whoa, 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 you're doing the thing.
Even respond to whether or not in the next election pushes them out.
But I mean, what are we supposed to do? Not say that, like, that was a catch-22. We weren't going to win either way.
The reality is that we have someone in power who's attempted coup. And so we have to get real about power. And that means convincing large swaths of the population to potentially not obey. I'll just give 3 examples of it. I'll give one clean example that tactically that's being talked about now, which is the idea of a general strike is a way to disable parts of the economy such that the whole system can't keep grinding forward. So that's one conversation that's happening around sort of in the non-cooperation circle of people. And I think I just want to say this, which is at this stage where we are, it can seem impossible to imagine Trump being kicked out because we're so far out of that period. So we're not there yet. Non-cooperation.
Stop. Because again, this is the whole, like, this all started with the impeachment shit. Like, I hate to say it, man. Like, the more you go after this guy, the more people do just kind of roll their eyes at it. It's like, no, you got to go after his policies and the smaller potatoes, kid.
Operation always starts small. It's always ineffective in the beginning because you're not at the size to be able to work. But very targeted non-cooperation has a history of success and has an ability to change national policy in a way that just pleading and asking for government officials isn't necessarily successful. I tell a story from one of my mentors who recently passed away, Dick Taylor. He was involved in
he was a what now?
A thing called blockades, where they were trying to stop the U.S. who was supporting a dictator, Yahya Khan, of East Pakistan, what we now know as Bangladesh. Yahya Khan was involved in mass murders, huge amounts of people were dying, and the U.S. was the sole country basically arming him, sending armor shipments. So this group found out in Philadelphia, a group of Quakers, that the arms shipments were being loaded here in Philadelphia. And so they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to stop them. We're going to organize a naval blockade. And
Every time I hear the word Philadelphia, Richard Jedi had a great bit on Philadelphia.
With their 25, 30 people jumped into boats and began blocking these massive arms shipments. As expected, they were pulled out by a Coast Guard, and they weren't successful on their first forays, but they began doing it over and over again. Eventually, they got to international longshoremen, and the longshoremen are the folks who load those arms shipments on and off. And the longshoremen said, if you guys set up a picket line, we won't cross it. They were moved by these stories of what was going on, and they realized they had a role to play in history.
I just feel like this is all very anecdotal in the long run.
So they refused to load these.
I mean, it's beautiful,
shipments.
and hopefully that this is like, if this is something that's a wider call to action or like a wider like reaction of people, then that'd be great. But
as a result, U.S. was no longer. I mean, first they stopped using Philadelphia ports, then New York City ports, then on and on until eventually they got the longshoremen all across the East Coast to stop loading.
So it did
shipments.
work.
That's non-cooperation. That's not a protest in the streets. That's not asking for. That's not pleading for. It's saying there's a thing we're going to get in the way of, either as the Quakers who are jumping into the boats, or as the longshoremen who are saying we're not going to load, we're not going to obey. And that was the major contributor towards shifting U.S. foreign policy in terms of supporting that particular dictator. So that's a history I want us to just be alert to, because it tells a story about how non-cooperation can be successful in this country. And that stratagem of understanding that the pillars of support is about, if you pull enough pillars, it doesn't mean we have to convince the elites to go along with us. We're not going to convince Elon Musk. We're not going to convince Donald Trump. We're not going to convince the Trump family. But if we're able to pull pillars, they don't have a choice, because they don't do anything. They don't work. They don't do real things. They don't do things with their hands. People who do things with their hands, they can make decisions about how we actually do things. When we do it in united front, as we can collectively do non-cooperation.
What do we call that, guys?
That's the pillar.
Seizing the means of production
of power. That's the upside down triangle. When we pull those pillars away, the triangle falls.
And number 10 is envision a better, a positive future. And I think we're going to spend time here, obviously, and
DDP.
Like
sorry,
talking to authors and people. I mean, a plan is better than no plan, and it's important for us, even in eras where we don't have the immediate ability to make to shape society in the way that we want it to. It's important to have a sort of a northern light, I guess, and some ideas about what we would do if we were in power. Both
the North Star
as an inspiration, and you never know.
The Northern Lights come and go, Sam. That's not a good analogy.
I mean, you never know. And that is a big deal. Well, this is Daniel, this is really, really helpful, and we're going to put a link to this and to your book, and we will check back in with you.
Oh man, did somebody recommend this because Sam said that this is really helpful?
Hopefully, soon,
hey, you know what it is,
to get a sense of where we're at and what's turning. One thing I just wanted to ask you about that is sort of off this list. I see things like how we can create fissures within the constituency that has been supportive of Trump. I mean, you've talked about that a little bit, but I'm looking at this Bobby Kennedy stuff, and I don't know if he actually wants to get into the administration or he's just trying to raise money or what the deal is. But
oh no, he is trying to run the Department of Agriculture. Come on now.
A lot of the stuff that he proposes is completely
health
antithetical
and agriculture. I think he wants a double role.
Trump's agenda. They want to get rid of the administrative state, and he supposedly wants to make the FDA, the EPA, the USDA more effective. He also wants everybody to get hepatitis. Other diseases. But there are elements of what he wants to do that people are attracted to, people who are supportive of Trump. And they don't seem to realize that it's fundamentally at odds with the other part of Trump's agenda, which is to get rid of the administrative state. Corporations are not going to take yellow dye number 7 out of Captain Crunch by themselves. And so is there a concept of strategically creating cleaves within their constituencies? Is that a strategy? Is there what are the tactics associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. I mean, the reality here is this is a riotous group of people who've been out of power for quite some time. They are not in alignment. They're not in agreement, and they're basically being held together by loyalty, an authoritarian loyalty system, which is perhaps more dangerous than being in alignment in some ways, because it allows them to move on a dime. Trump says we'll do this, and they say, okay, that's the way we're heading. So that is in some ways, certain ways, potentially more dangerous. But it is true. They're not in agreement. They're not in alignment. And some of those things I think can be taken advantage of. I think the most effective way for us to do that is to really be rooted in our own values and asserting what's the vision that we have to become attractive. Because infighting can be handled and managed if we don't know if that's handleable and manageable. But Trump is
you know what?
very relaxed about a lot of chaos in his administration. That's what we've seen. So the idea that there's infighting, he likes. So I don't think it's an attempt to just kind of add drama to that, but I think it's about cleaving off parts of it and saying, for folks who either supported Trump or folks who didn't vote for whatever reason, I think there's opportunity here to say, here's a vision that you have that we're in alignment with, and to cleave in that way by being attractive, because the future that we're going to need is going to need a lot of people to have increased trust in us and our vision and in a sort of progressive worldview that is not well understood actually by a lot of the folks in sort of that group. So I'm less trying to get to the elites, and I'm more trying to cleave off the supporters, people who back Trump. But we'll find out that he has every intention to screw them. That's why he's putting billionaires in. He's not going to represent them and their interests. So they need a place to land. And so I think we need to create some open invitations, some places to do it.
Daniel Hunter,
I mean,
the book is What If Trump Wins? An interactive pick your path adventure, and 10 ways to be prepared and grounded now that Trump has won.
Guys, I'm gonna admit this. I'm a little sad that it wasn't the pick your path that I thought it was. It's not a choose your own adventure.
We'll put a link to all of that. And
you are not rolling dice. What is?
I hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
I don't like it.
Really, really helpful. Thanks.
Do we have an A and B? All right, that was really good. Thank you for who recommended that to me. Yeah, I don't know. Now that I think about it, will I read that book if it's not a choose your own adventure? Because I know at the beginning of this, I'm like, I'm definitely reading this. I'm gonna buy this, but then, well, no. Who am I kidding? I'm gonna be completely honest. I'm probably not. I don't have time to read that stuff. I have a backlog of so much crap. I paint miniatures. I read comics. I read books. I got a book that's been literally sitting on my night table for better part of like a year and a half. I gotta get to it. It is Expanse, the fourth book in the Expanse series, if you were wondering. Good series. Really good series. Actually, I enjoy it. As far as like its realistic approach to like the future of like what would happen if we colonize Mars and kind of thing. It's an Elon Musk wet dream, apparently. So, sorry for that. But yeah, I think that overall, I like the message as far as like building coalitions, especially amongst like your locality, your friends. I mean, it was kind of like a long way to go around there to say like be supportive of each other, but also, yeah, I think that you know what, made me a little bit more hopeful. So I hope you guys enjoyed it though. Anyway, do we get anything else? No. I got this headache, so I'm gonna call it right now. I appreciate you guys checking me out. I also leave a comment on your thoughts on the interview, on if you think that everything that he said was practical as far as, I don't want to go into like the doomer mode that he was talking about, where it is kind of like, yeah, it's easy to just fall in that pit of despair and just be like, oh, there's nothing we could do, even if we organize. But I feel like that I'm already sensing that we're kind of gearing up for a way stronger resistance than 2016. And I also think that we're going to have some Trump supporters who are already, I mean, we're not even a week in, and there's so many people that are disaffected by some of the decisions that he's making, where it's just like, yeah, you're kind of proving everybody right that it is just this big machine that supports itself. So at some point, that's what everybody's going to want, that change. So anyway, as I said, leave a comment. hit that like button. It's free and it really helps me out in the algorithm. I'm dead serious. So please hit that like and sub to the channel if you're not already sub. Trying to hit that 1,000. So I really appreciate you guys being here. I'll see you in the next one.